Mr. Secretary, on Monday, January 13th of this year, President Trump, in a tweet, said, and I quote, that I was the person who saved pre-existing conditions in your health care, end of quote. How did he do that?
The President is going to ensure that any health care reforms protect pre-existing conditions, unlike the Affordable Care Act, where a 55-year-old couple in Missouri making $70,000 a year and are unsubsidized would pay over $30,000 a year in premiums and have a deductible of over $12,000. That's a meaningless insurance card. That's not actual protection of pre-existing conditions. He's the one committed to actually doing that if Congress will work with him.
And concurrently is trying to invalidate the only law that exists that protects people with pre-existing conditions. So in other words, before the enactment of the Affordable Care Act, an insurance company could deny you coverage if you had a kid who was stuck with childhood cancer. You can't do that anymore. It's against the law. There are a number of pre-existing conditions whereby an insurance company could jerk you around just because you were born into a predisposition to a pre-existing condition or a chronic illness. There was a lawsuit in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals challenging the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act, the only law that protects people with pre-existing conditions. And it was July of 2019. It was called Texas versus Azar. That's you. And there was a suit brought by 18 state attorneys general and endorsed by the administration to invalidate the individual mandate and thus the entire Affordable Care Act. Again, the only law in the books that protects people with pre-existing conditions. How do you reconcile that?
First, that's actually a false statement. ERISA protects individuals with pre-existing conditions, the 180 million individuals who have insurance from the private sector employers as well as their unions. Medicare protects for 60 million Americans, individuals with pre-existing conditions. Medicaid protects individuals with pre-existing conditions. And in the Affordable Care Act litigation, this is a litigation position, not a policy position, and the President has made it clear that he will veto any piece of legislation that doesn't ensure in the individual market actual effective and real.
Mr. Secretary, claiming back my time, the replacement to the Affordable Care Act that Congress tried to repeal and was defeated in the Senate had a provision as it relates to pre-existing conditions. And that provision said that an insurance company could not deny someone coverage for a pre-existing condition, but the coverage didn't have to include the treatment for the pre-existing condition. That is fact, and that is cynical. And here's my concern with respect to what we're dealing with now. While the flu and COVID-19, which is a disease caused by the coronavirus, may not be pre-existing conditions, those with pre-existing conditions, asthma, chronic congestive heart failure, young kids under the age of 5, the elderly, are at greater risk because of their pre-existing conditions to become much worse, triggered by this flu, or this COVID-19 that we're dealing with. And it is very clear to me and anybody that looks at this, based on fact, that the only law that exists that protects people with pre-existing conditions is the Affordable Care Act, and you're trying to destroy that. I yield back.